Hello friends and welcome to another episode of Booked, a place to explore the realms of creativity. Today's guest is SS Fitzgerald. Thank you so much for joining me. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great and thank you for having me on today.
Oh, it's a pleasure. I've been so excited about this. Ever since I read Sinner's Pass, I was like, I have to talk to this person. It was so good. It was so good.
I really appreciate that.
I'm very, very excited about this interview. I don't know if you can tell because I've said it about 5 times already in the space of this intro. So for the benefit of the listeners who haven't heard of you before, could you tell us a little bit about you and what to expect from your work?
Yeah, absolutely. So I write under SS Fitzgerald, which is just the abbreviation of my full name. Mm-hmm. Primarily a horror author. I think that if you just look at my logo, it pretty much tells you everything that you're going to get out of me. I write a little bit of thrillers and war. I write a lot of horror and then some science fiction, which is all reflected in the symbolism I use. If anybody's interested in like the symbolism that went into that logo, I have it out there on my own podcast, Birds with Words. Mm-hmm. So the reason why I say it that way is I think horror primarily can be interwoven with multiple genres, similar to what Michael Crichton did with Jurassic Park. If you read the novel, absolutely a sci-fi thriller, but if you ignored it as a horror novel, you'd be misleading people because it's absolutely a horror novel as well. So ultimately, what you're going to get out of me is you're going to get a visceral horror, no matter what type of story I'm telling. I recently got a brand new editor who started with me after I finished Sinner's Pass, and after she went through it, she said, "Yeah, your voice is a very visceral voice." And going back, I think that pretty much nails it, because if you start with my first novel, A Fold to Extinction, you get visceral animal attacks, and then you've read Sinner's Pass. The death scenes in Sinner's Pass are not pleasant death scenes. So.
Oh no, nobody's having a good time.
I mean, some people are having a good time. They're just having it for the wrong reason.
The people dying aren't having a good time.
Yeah. Leading up to it.
So in terms of being primarily rooted in horror, do you find that is challenging to place yourself in the market? Because I know indie authors sometimes have trouble because it's kind of like cross-genre splicing in a lot of people's books because you don't have as many reins on you. Does that make it difficult for you to categorize it, or have you found your niche now?
I think people who worry too much about writing to the market probably struggle with that more. I have the stories that I want to tell, and I'm going to write them regardless of whether or not something fits a market or an expectation. I'll use this kind of... I've been working on and off for a fantasy series for quite a while. And the fantasy series itself is heavily rooted in horror. I guess you could call it grimdark. Okay. But there's elements of horror that come out for every character as they go through their journey. If I try to sit there and worry about saying, well, is this a fantasy or is this a horror or is this, a techno thriller, whatever genre I wanted to try and put it into, I wouldn't be able to write the story the way I need to tell it. And that's not fair for the people who just want to enjoy a good story. So does it make it harder for people to find it? Maybe. Looking back at my first novel, somebody came back and said, it's not quite a horror. It's more of a thriller. And I was like, well, okay, where are we going to cut the line here, right? So if you go back to like Jurassic Park, it's like, it's a techno thriller. Okay, but it's also sci-fi. Oh, but it's also a horror novel. There's also a point of trying to have that conversation about the environment. So where do we put our novels in there? I don't stress myself too terribly about that. I think having an organic following, you'll get the right people. And that's probably where I've struggled, the most as an author, is just trying to get it in front of people without harassing them about it.
It's hard. And I'm seeing so many different tactics across social media, for example, of, people that they'll just comment under people's posts and they'll say, read my book. And it becomes like white noise for me because I'm like, I've seen that 50 times and it's not been in the right context. So I'm not interested in it. Whereas I saw a book sort of float across my timeline yesterday and it was by James Maxwell and it just hit at the right time. and I saw it, and I was looking for something short to read, and it was like 150 something pages, and the description was awful, as in like, oh, that sounds like a horrible tale. So I thought, oh, that would be the perfect thing for me. So I read it. I downloaded it immediately and almost read the whole thing last night, and it worked for me because it was at the right time. But you kind of shoot in your shot sometimes, I think.
Yeah, yeah. And there's a point of wanting to be personal, but not being too personal. So I don't share a ton about my family, and that's more for their safety, especially when you have young kids. So it's, I don't post a ton about that. When I do post about it, it's after the fact. Several months have already gone by. So, they say just be yourself out there. I'm like, be yourself, but I'm working on the cybersecurity side outside of writing. Very hesitant to share too much information with people publicly. So you got to find that right line of, advertising your writing and then advertising yourself as just, hey, this is who I am, without making it where people are trying to target you. And it doesn't help any that social media is full of scammers or targeting authors all the time either.
Yeah, I mean, everyone thinks I'm a scammer because I'm really nice and I'm doing stuff for free, and they're like, that's suspicious. And I get it, it is suspicious, but it's just because I'm a bit weird. That's largely what it is. But I think, I think you're right. You can't be too personal, but you can be personable, and just being, I don't know, approachable in some sort of way, or at least making yourself accessible to a point, because you don't get that level of accessibility from like a massive author with a huge following, or somebody that's with a massive publisher, because they're too busy being inundated with like hundreds of thousands of people trying to talk to them, whereas indie authors get the opportunity to actually go, yeah, I'd love for you to ask me about my book, that'd be really cool, because you really, really deeply care about making that connection to readers so that you can get more readers to enjoy your story. So yeah, it's a fine balance, but it's just it's so fascinating to me to see people navigating that space, because there are a few authors that I've seen where they don't get traction really, really quickly because they hope that they're going to get traction really quickly, and so they go, I guess everybody hates me then. And it's
yeah, I know exactly what you're talking. I've seen those posts as well.
Yeah.
And to kind of defend them, this writing to some degree is a vanity art, just by the nature of what it is. So it is very personal when people don't want to read it, or they don't like what you write. And I think with any type of art, you just have to accept that it's not for everybody.
Yeah, absolutely.
Whereas the struggle really comes down to, there's not an easy way for authors to get their books in front of readers, or the right readers. Advertisements, for anybody who's listening to this and is not a writer themselves, paid advertisements are terrible. There's a way to do them, but they're not guaranteed to actually generate anything for you. Okay. And then there's a lot of investment that goes into it to try and figure out how to find the right people, because you don't want to just spam out, an advertisement to the wrong demographic. So there's that portion of it. So when you're trying to push it yourself, like on any type of social media, there's the flip side of, if you're too aggressive about it, people don't want to pay attention to you, things of that nature. So it just is what it is. You got to pick your battle. And that's why, again, going back to your other question about trying to get the right genres for the book, my readers know that anything I write is going to have that visceral horror element to it, whether it's a sci-fi novel or it's a contemporary horror novel or any of the projects that I'm currently working.
And that's what I love about you as a writer. And it means that I can safely pick up one of your books, even if it's leaning towards a genre that I'm not used to, or that I don't necessarily pick. I know I'm going to get that thing I want out of it, which is, as you say, the visceral reaction, because I want to feel uncomfortable when I read a book. I don't like going, oh, that was nice. I like going, oh, fucking hell, that was a lot. That's what I like out of a book. So, I mentioned Sinner's Pass at the beginning. I'd love to talk to you about it. And hopefully other people will hear this and go, oh, that sounds amazing, I want to read that book. I firstly would love to know where, it's such a cheesy, corny question, I'd love to know where the motivation came from to write this, because it is so out there and full on.
Yeah, and there's a lot of inspiration that went into Sinner's Pass. I have to give my head nod to the storylines behind the Silent Hill games. There's a very large parallel between the two, but
Mm-hmm.
the overall story inspiration. I was listening to a YouTuber, and forgive me, I can't remember his name now,
Mm-hmm.
but he does true horror stories that were unsolved. And in this one, he talks about this couple in the turn of the century, right around the 1900s. They buy a house out in the middle of the woods to try and get away from the busy city life. And he goes back to the city for a while because he had an important call come in. And then when he took the train back, his wife wasn't there. And when he got off the train, he took a taxi, and then he had to walk like several miles because the taxi didn't have a road to his house. And he found his wife upstairs in an empty house, and she was in this catatonic state, and she'd been driven crazy. So I took that story and put it as the foundation to the journal that Harry finds. So
Oh,
part of
yeah.
when he develops his understanding of what has happened in the city of Sinners Pass, or the town, I don't want to call it a city, the town of
Mm-hmm.
Sinners Pass, is based somewhat on a true story. Now, I
Mm.
extrapolated a lot of details. There's a
Yeah.
lot of things that aren't there, obviously, because it's fiction. I have to make it
Mm.
worse. Um, and then I put the entire background of Harry, his family, and then the town itself. And that's really where I would say if you had to pick one thing that was the inspiration, it was
Mm-hmm.
that. And then I just took elements like, I really like the Silent Hill type element, so I incorporated that in there. I
Mm-hmm.
will say that somebody reached out to me, a fan reached out and asked if the ritual was a inspiration to it. I did not watch
Mm.
the ritual until after Sinner's Pass was published, so
Oh.
was not. It was a complete coincidence that there's some similarities there.
Mm-hmm. That's very cool. So, how long did it take you to write it from the point where you were like, "Oh, this is great inspiration. Let me work from this," to "Oh, I finished my book."
So from beginning of planning to final, like typing the end to it,
Mm-hmm.
it was probably 6 months. And
Oh my god.
what was faster about it though was I already had certain elements that I had been working on leading up to that. So I finished A Full
Mm.
to Extinction, and in like right in that intermediate time period between finishing it and trying to get it published, I was already working on another horror story, but I couldn't put all the pieces together, and that's
Mm.
when I started working with the background to what ended up becoming Sinner's Pass. So I had elements in there. The editing phase of it went much longer because I learned a lot from my first novel,
Of
which I
course,
think,
yeah.
and then even from Sinner's Pass, I learned even more from Sinner's Pass. So my next series will be uh, more focused and more put together than even my first two novels. So it was really just trying to fine tune it that took longer than actually
Yeah.
writing it. I mean, not this might sound like I'm trying to brag, but I can knock out 50,000 words, 60,000 words in 30 days. But
Mm.
putting it all into a cohesive piece is going to take longer than that.
That makes sense, and especially if you're writing with pieces that you already had struggled to stitch together and make a whole thing. That makes sense to me. One of the things that I really loved about Sinner's Pass was the like cultish elements to it. I found them incredibly uncomfortable, and it kind of mirrors my personal opinion about organized religion. Um, what about that relates to your real life? Do you have any sort of does religion or like cultish behaviors is that horror to you? Is that something that makes you uncomfortable, or is it something that you thought, oh, this is gonna freak people out?
Yeah, I never wrote it. None of my pieces are written with the intention of like, I think this is going to freak people out,
Okay.
which is weird to say as a horror author. Uh, the entire cult side of it is mirrors my problem with organized religion. So
Mm-hmm.
I do consider myself a Christian.
Mm-hmm.
As I don't care what people want to take about that. And ultimately, you could say that Sinner's Pass is a piece of Christian art if you wanted to go that far with it, because the way it
Mm.
unfolds. But the element of the cult reflects how people misuse or misinterpret or even factually abuse religion. So there's a scene, and this doesn't give away anything important to the overall story, where the pastor is talking to our two protagonists in a church service, and they confront the pastor during the service about a misinterpretation of sin. And the pastor turns around and uses a true interpretation of the King James Bible. So there's a scene in the Bible where Jesus is about to be stoned to death, and he stops them and essentially says, "How can you stone me when I've told you that I am the Son of God?" But in the King James Bible, "the" is italicized, and people often think that that's for emphasis. But if you look at it, there's an annotation in the King James Bible that "the" is because they don't know what article is supposed to be there. So there is a real debate in the religious community if that article is supposed to be "the" or "a." And if you read the next section, Jesus explains that God has told them that they are all sons of God. So it makes sense that he says, "I am a son of God." But that, does it overall change how Christians should act? No. But does that matter in the scene of the moment if he's saying, "I am the Son of God and the only one," or that he's a son of God, but he's leading the correct type of life? And that changes how that is. So that is a true argument in the religious community that is happening, but the speaker in that moment is using that to shut down the argument that the two protagonists are using. And then we learn later that a cult leader is actively manipulating the letters that they're finding from what we know as the redeemed, the crazy people that come back, and they're making it look like it's instructions on how to stay there safely, and they're not instructions, it's warnings, and they're actively taking out the warning portion of it so that more cult leaders, or not cult leaders, cult followers feel reassured that they're doing the right thing.
That very much came across, and it did, to me, read like a commentary on the sort of misuse and manipulation of any type of sort of religious following, because I think that is something that is prevalent. Especially, I've noticed this since moving from England, because it's not particularly like an overtly religious or spiritual place where I grew up anyway. I'm not saying for the whole of England, so don't come for me in the comments. Not that everybody comes for anybody in the comments, because nobody's commenting, but but moving here, I've noticed a huge amount of it, and there is a lot of justification for terrible behaviour, and people hiding behind religion as this like weird haze, and they're like, "Well, I can do it because I'm a Christian, so it's fine," or "I'm a whatever." I've just used Christian as an example, but and then going on to do the complete opposite, but saying, "Oh, no, it's fine because that's what it says in the good book." And it's like, well, it doesn't though. That's what you've interpreted it as, and then you're using it as this tool to justify being awful. But yeah, I think it was really well done, and I enjoyed it because it wasn't like it doesn't trash spirituality at all. It was more like, this is how it can be used for evil.
Yeah.
And it was very, very well done, and I really, really enjoyed that.
Thank you.
There was something that you mentioned that was in the book. There are lots and lots of creatures. I'm going to try not to give too much away. There are lots of creatures that make you to be very uncomfortable. And I know that you said that you inserted a very, very specific phobia of somebody that you love into the book.
Yes. So my wife has an unusual phobia. I may butcher how this is pronounced, but it's slasiophobia, which is the intense fear of worms or anything worm-like. So there is a scene where a creature has an appendage that drops out, and the slime comes out, and maggots pour out of the slime. And I wrote that specifically because I knew my wife was going to get there, and I didn't tell her it was coming because it's your second time seeing the creature. So she didn't. She already felt uncomfortable with the first encounter with the creature because it does something that she was like, I didn't know it was going to do that in the first place. And then the second time they encounter it, it does that. And I remember when she got to that point because she stopped reading and she got mad at me about it. But I absolutely used that because I knew she was going to go through it, and encounter that scene and be. I mean, I'm a horror author. I have to do that, right?
You have to. It's your job. It's your job to make people a little bit uncomfortable. Oh, that's so funny. Do you know what? When I was reading it, because I remember you telling me before I'd finished it, and I was just trying to figure out what it was, and I really thought, and I don't remember if you gave this creature a name, it was the dude with the box on his head.
Okay, yeah.
I thought it was that, because that's really specific.
Yeah.
And I thought, what a weird fear. I was totally wrong.
Yeah, no worries. I mean, look, the fear of worms, I think if you encountered most people, they wouldn't know that was an actual phobia. So,
No.
Yeah, but my wife has it.
Oh, well, I'm sorry. God, I bet after a rainstorm it's terrifying to go outside for her.
And I can't wait for the child to bring her an earthworm one day. It's going to happen. It's going to happen.
You have to try and get it on video. Not to show anyone, just for to laugh at later.
One time, my wife and I, it was middle of spring, we went for a run around a little pond that we have here. It has a running trail around it. And I don't know what type of caterpillars these were, but they were in some type of molting process, and they were falling out of the trees around us. And we were too far away from the vehicle to get the vehicle to her. And it was just a scream fest until she got back to the truck. It was wonderful for me. So
it's so funny. I have this like intense fear of spiders. I can't stand them. There's something about the way they move. Like if they don't move and they're still, they don't freak me out. As soon as they start creeping their legs around, I can't cope with it. And I wonder if she has like, does she have like worm nightmares? Because I have spider nightmares.
She does. She's told me about her worm nightmares before.
Yeah, I bet it looked like that run around the pond. Because that's what my spider nightmares look like. Usually it's me getting trapped under a picnic table and there's loads of spiders. It's like this one recurring dream that I have.
Well, you know I'm going to use this against you, so
that's fine. Because it'll freak me out and that's what I want from a horror book, so you go ahead. You can have that for free. You said that you learned quite a lot from A Fall to Extinction to Sinner's Past and then beyond. What did you change about the way that you wrote your book the second time around?
I started picking up on, I guess, crutch phrases. You know, they say that the authors have crutch words. So when I wrote Sinner's Past, I caught on to phrases that I use too often. And then, you know, I hate to say this, like I went back and like once I was done with Sinner's Past and people had it in their hand, I went back and said, I hate this now because there's new crutch phrases that I've caught. And so I've slowly started picking that up, and I'll definitely say, you know, shout out to Julie, my newest editor. She's helped me identify those and why I do them, and that's been a great improvement. And I think in my upcoming series, you'll see a drastic shift in voice just because I've been able to fix that, and being able to get rid of crutch phrases. You're able to create individual character voices that are more unique to those characters.
Oh, that makes sense. That makes a lot of sense. So, because I've had the opportunity to beta read your next book, and I'm not going to give too much away because obviously it's still in the phases of development. I will be sending you your feedback. I've nearly finished it. I've been working on it. I've nearly finished it, but I keep doing things and whatever. Anyway. And it's very, very good. I really enjoyed it. And I can see exactly what you mean. You have created a much more clear, unique voice for each of the characters. And I can tell distinctly from the way that they're presented, the way they talk, the way that they conduct themselves in that world, that they are vastly different. And it's incredibly enjoyable. I love multiple POV things because I get bored really easily. What have been some challenges for you in terms of getting your book out there and getting it in front of people?
You know, I think I went through what most indie authors do, and I tried to go the traditional route. I never thought that A Fall to Extinction would go that route. So, and that's just because I wrote A Fall to Extinction for myself. It was a love letter to like every childhood fantasy I had as a kid. And I was like, I just got to do this for me for once. And it was also forcing myself to write because I gave myself a deadline.
Mm-hmm.
So when I finished that, I said, well, let's do Sinner's Pass and try and go the traditional route now that I know what I'm doing a little bit more. I
Mm-hmm.
know the community. I know what people are looking for. I know how to query agents. And then I had a chance encounter with another author, Michael Hearns, who is much more well known for his detective series. And if you haven't
Mm-hmm.
read him, he has his own dark tropics genre dedicated to him now because of how successful his novels have
Oh
been.
wow.
And we sat down, we had coffee, and I was telling him, what I wanted out of traditional publishing, and he just said, "Well, why?" And I was, "Well, that gets you out there, right?" He goes, "Not really." So essentially, the way it's going to break down is, you're a horror author. You get signed, you get out there, say, "Okay, we're going to put you into this bookstore, and we're going to have this big event." You're like, "Yeah, that's what I wanted." But what they don't tell you is the event really isn't for you, the new author. It might be, I'm just going to use Stephen King as an example, nothing against
Mm.
him. It might be Stephen King has his new novel out and they need to block off the shelves so other books aren't right next to it. So they're going to put yours on the left side and another new author on the right side. And then it's going to be Stephen King's focal is in the center with the hoping chance that somebody is going there to pick up, and then they might pick your novel up, not their competitor's novel up on the left side.
Interesting.
And then the biggest problem that authors, I'm saying authors in general, not just indie
Yeah.
authors,
Mm-hmm.
is getting it advertised. And we talked about that earlier.
Mm.
And uh, unless you get like the sweetest contract ever, you're probably not getting that out of your first contract as a brand new, traditionally published author.
Mm-hmm.
I've heard a couple of horror stories where they said that they got like a $5,000 advance, and then
Mm-hmm.
the agent highly encouraged them to spend that advance advertising their novel. And it's like, well, then what's the purpose of getting that advance if
Yeah.
I'm the one doing it? And because the publishing company wasn't going to do it, the contract didn't include any type of marketing or advertising for it. So
Mm.
if the strongest area that I'm like struggling with is the marketing side and getting it in front of people,
Yeah.
and the traditional route wasn't going to help me with that,
Mm.
I didn't see a reason to sink a lot of effort into it. And I don't think Sinner's Pass would have been the same novel had I gone the traditional route. I do think that there's some themes in there that are troubling that I
Mm-hmm.
think that a traditional route would have said, hey, we need to modify this a little bit more for a modern audience, which I didn't want to do.
Mm-hmm.
The parts that are uncomfortable for, if it's because of your gender or if it's
Mm-hmm.
because you felt like it was a racial thing or if you felt like it was because of a sexuality thing, it was written that way to make you uncomfortable on purpose.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And I think that some people shy away from that. So I did, I just waited out. And I said, hey, this is going to be what I want in the form that I want. I just have to figure out how to get it in front of people. So I feel like I've kind of danced around your entire question here for a second, but it's to come back with, it's a struggle finding the right people because I'm just going to say I'm a nobody at the beginning of this,
Mm-hmm.
but you start small, local, I have a newsletter, I have dedicated fans on it. And as long as every time that newsletter comes out and it's not at 0 opens, I'm
Yeah.
good. And it's never been at 0 opens. So somebody out there is doing it. And I don't do this for a major profit. And I can point to my website. I have a bunch of free stories on my website. In fact, Sinner's Pass has 3 stories that lead up to the events of the novel, and they're all free, and I keep them that way. 2 of them have been read by a professional voice actor, and it's for free. And a third one's going to come out on my podcast, and I'm going to read it myself. So
Oh,
you're
brilliant.
going to get a lot of free content from me. And that's all I really want. I'd rather have a bunch of people that are really interested in the stories and happy about it than to be able to come back and say, I got a really big paycheck from a publishing company as an advance. It is a struggle sometimes finding the right way to, like we said, not harass the readers.
Mm-hmm.
But I have fun stories, and getting those periodic messages like, hey, I love this scene, or I really enjoyed this one, that makes writing worth it.
Once you actually look into the industry, if you go for, okay, I'm gonna circle back a little bit. So let's say you're like, I'm going to write a book. This is going to be amazing. I'm going to have books on shelves. They're going to be in Barnes and Noble. They're going to be in Waterstones or wherever you get your books from. And everybody's going to know about my book, and people are going to be talking about it on social media. And then you go and you find the millions of people writing books, and you realize that it is competitive. And you have to have so many skills if you're going to self-publish. It's not like you get to write a book and then everyone's going to read it. No, you got to keep hustling for years afterwards, because as soon as you stop talking about it, everybody else will as well. So you need to have a lot of stamina, and you need to have really realistic expectations. And it's something that kind of grounded me a little bit, because one of my colleagues a couple of years ago wrote a book in a few months, put it out there, self-published, and I was like, that's a thing now. And his piece of advice was, find your people before you finish writing your book, because then you'll have somebody to talk to about it. And I was like, okay, that makes sense. So I joined Twitter, and I was like, okay, cool, there's loads of people here. They're all self-publishing. There are loads of them. Dig deeper. There's even more. Dig deeper. There's so many more. Everybody's writing a book. And what makes yours more special than somebody else's? You know, it's the cover, it's the way you present yourself, it's the blurb, it's what people are saying about it, and it's not that easy. And I think once you realise that if you focus on people actually enjoying the thing that you are producing over making any money out of it, then you'll have a much better time. I've noticed, like, people like yourself that are like, I just want people to like it, or at least read it, or give it a go. That makes it feel more approachable to somebody than just buy my book because I want money.
Yeah. And, to give your listeners a little bit more insight, because a friend recently reached out to me. So I have a hardcover edition of Sinner's Pass. Love it. That's my preferred edition of it. And if you go out there, it's listed for $29.99. You're like, dang, that is an expensive book. And I agree. Yeah. $29.99 is ridiculous. But if you look at the return rate, I get 4 cents a copy on my hardcovers that come back. So not something that you're expecting, massive incomes back from. And I shared that with, like, when this person said, hey, in Germany, this book is selling. I guess they have an upmark at the store that it's in Germany. I said, yeah, that's their own upmark. And I sent a screenshot. I was like, yep, that's what I get out of it. So they're making like 30 extra bucks off of it. Yeah. Germany, they're selling it for 79 euros. I was like, that's not my price. I promise you.
For Sinner's Pass?
Yes, for Sinner's Pass. Yeah.
I mean, it's a good book, but it's a bit steep.
Yeah. It's on I think, I got to go back and double check, so don't hold me to this. I think it's at a 55% discount for, bulk purchases in the European Union. So yeah, that's just, that bookstore is just upcharging for whatever reason. Not reflective of me. I'm not doing it. You can buy it directly from me for significantly cheaper.
Good plug. In terms of your hardcovers, so obviously they're more expensive to produce, which means that you get a much lower income from people purchasing it, although I know people do love to have a hardcover on their shelves. I noticed that in your most recent newsletter that you were talking about putting extra content to make it more sort of valuable to somebody if they were going to spend that kind of money. Why did you decide to do that, and what sort of thing do you think you're going to be doing with the sort of next book that you put out?
Yeah, and that just really comes down to again, the cost of production, how much I have to charge, just so I'm not personally paying out just to have it. So going back to like $29.99, I felt really bad that the people who were hardcore enthusiasts, because I sold quite a few hardcovers, that they were paying significantly more, obviously, than the paperback or even the ebook versions, with nothing to show other than it's a physical copy, and it's pretty. So for Alone Together, which is my upcoming series, I've decided that the hardcovers are going to act as the special edition for the series. So you'll still get the main story, but I'm going to include artwork in there. So you've seen my 8-bit artwork out there. It's going to be included in the back. I'm going to include the short stories, which, yes, they're still going to be free online, so anybody can read them. So it's not like exclusive, but you get to have it all in one place. And I don't want to share what the cover art is going to be, because obviously going to be a big reveal, but
Yeah,
the
of course.
spine is going to have an artwork of its own that deteriorates over time in the series, so that you can see where book one was and it goes all the way down. And I want people to have some pride in, hey, I spent more money and I got a little bit more for my, the effort. And I think that's only fair to do, given the fact that I can't change, how much it's coming out, because again, going back to $29.99, make 4 cents a copy off of it. So I want people to, if they're going to spend that type of money, feel like they're getting just a little bit more because they supported me that way.
I think that's a fantastic idea.
Thank you.
That's a fantastic idea. Also, when you said the thing about the spines deteriorating over the series, I literally got goosebumps. I don't know why, but it's a fantastic idea and I love it. Knowing what it's about, I'm like, that's perfect. I love it so much. So, what is the timeline that you are hoping that you'll be able to work toward for releasing Alone Together?
So, do I like to stick to a plan? Yes, but I also understand now, after my first 2 books, you need to be flexible on those plans. Now, that being said, I have a time frame that I want Alone Together out, and I want, at minimum, I want it out before September of this year, which I think it'll be out far before then. If you're wondering why September, for horror authors, the time frame of August through November is the hot spot for horror authors, and that's just the way it is. So that's why I kind of want it in that time frame. I do think it's going to be earlier than that. Your other side of the question is, what do I think I'm going to go forward with trying to execute it, because it's with beta readers. I'm going to get the last of my responses in April. So they have a little bit less than 30 days as of right now to get me their responses. From the responses I've gotten back so far, there hasn't been a lot that needed to be changed. I think the biggest problem with changes is because I'm currently working on book 4 of Alone Together, and this is a benefit of being an indie author, is that I'm realizing there's elements that I needed to foreshadow or build up into my previous books to get to the point of where I am there. So there is an element that I did go back, and you might not have the copy with it. So I'm sorry, it might have been after you, where the prologue to book 1 directly speaks to events that happen in book 3 and book 4. So there's, I have a couple people that have said that the prologue, they enjoyed it, but it's very unusual how it's written, because it goes from an event to basically a series of news stories that you're like if you were just sitting in front of the TV that you're watching or listening to. And it was intentional. And I would say that majority of people enjoyed it to some degree. But none of those events are singularities. They all tie into something else, either in one of the short stories previous to it, which if you've gone out and read the Last Stand series, you already know a large portion of the prologue. And then there's a couple elements that lead into books later on. One of my ARC readers came back and said, "Are you going to expand on this?" And I didn't want to be like, "Yes, I am, but it's going to take a couple books to get there."
I know that this is going to be a series of, I can't remember how many books you said, quite a lot of books, which I'm thrilled about, because when you have something that is based around events like this, I'm trying not to give too much away because I don't know how much you've talked about on social media and stuff, but when you have events surrounding this, sometimes it's good to have a succinct book where it's like, okay, this short amount of events happen to these 2 people, for example, and that standalone is good, or maybe 2 or 3 books or whatever. But when you've got like something that's happening to the entire world, I want to know more. I want to know the befores, the afters. I want to know what caused it, what happened afterwards, because that's kind of what would happen in real life. There are loads of elements within stories with this sort of backbone that will leave me with more questions, because I think, oh, well, how would that have worked? But something that I really, really liked about Alone Together that was different for me, because I've not read a ton of books with this sort of world before, was the perspective of your sort of main points of view being in the military or in a military capacity, which I found fascinating, because that's the background stuff for a lot of like movies and books, is how do the people that are in charge and that are supposed to be helping people, how do they operate? What are their problems? What are their sort of structural issues, or their personal challenges. And I really liked that because I've never read anything that has that voice before. So I thought it was really, really enjoyable.
To speak directly about Alone Together. So for anybody who hasn't pieced it together yet, Alone Together is a post-apocalyptic horror series that I'm coming out with this year. As of right now, I plan on at least 8 books, but I have a beginning and I have the end sections where it needs to go. And it sets up a lot to have spin-offs, characters that can have their own stories. And you're absolutely right. The first book is lined up at this cataclysmic event that starts to fall apart for everybody. And we learn later on other books that it's been going on far longer than they thought. It's just got to that point where the camel's back is finally broken. So yes, there's a military character that is a central point of view. There's a veteran that's a central point of view. We have 2 main civilian characters in book 1 that become a central point of view. And I know that it's difficult to decipher from a civilian side what it's like on the military side during disasters. And I spent a lot of time responding to disasters in the military, and I wanted to share that they aren't these all-knowing, all-perfect people. They're just people that happen to have a set of skills, and those set of skills only take you so far. Our biggest advantage is the organization side to it, which we see in the story that in such apocalyptic events, the organization can only carry you so far as well. And I wanted to try and bring people into awareness because I'm going to use Hurricane Michael as an example here in the United States. When Hurricane Michael came through, I was in Panama City when it hit for the military. And we were just as cut off as all the people were when the storm came through because all the roads were gone. And we rely on the roads just as much as you guys do. It's not like we have some special way to get in. People are like, well, why don't you call helicopters? And I'm like, you don't understand what it takes to call a helicopter in and the space you need to call a helicopter in. And that's reflected in the story. And then how do you call it in? Because you're like, well, why don't you just use your radios? I'm like, well, there's limitations to your radio, which also becomes a plot point because I used something that really happened to me in a different hurricane for the military as a plot device in the story about not being able to talk to people on the radio because you gave me the wrong encryption. So I can only talk to this person, but I can't talk to all the other people around me. And people just don't realize how limited some of the capabilities are. And I really wanted people to see that it's not like the military is just going to come in and fix problems. And then if it's bad enough, the military is a problem all on its own. I'm not going to lie that I also browse Reddit for people that are talking about various situations. And there's this one thread that I think is hilarious. It's the zombie apocalypse thread. And it's people talking about how they would survive a zombie apocalypse. And my favorite one because I mostly lurk on there. My favorite one was a girl came on and said, hey, my husband said that if a zombie apocalypse ever happened, there's this armory down the street from us that's a National Guard armory. We're just going to go there and steal all the weapons. I'm like, this is a terrible idea. Let's assume that the guard isn't there. It's just a blank armory. It's not like the weapons are just hanging out in a lobby. There's a vault, which unless you have really high-tech technology, you're not going to get into that vault. And then if you mess with the vault too much, it has an analog alarm. And I don't know about you, but I don't want to be in a building that's screaming with zombies all around because I feel like that would just attract people. So I went on there. I wasn't rude to the person. I told them exactly why it was a terrible idea. And they also had this impression that they were going to have like other things in there, like hand grenades. I'm like, surprise, we don't keep hand grenades at National Guard armories.
No, not in little baskets under the counter.
No. We keep them in Easter egg baskets, but not under the counter. So, so I just kind of wanted to share why, because we see all these like apocalyptic movies, like zombie movies are a great example. And they're like, well, the army would just do this. I'm like, you highly underestimate what the army would do and or not do. And, another part of that is they always skip over like military bases. Military bases aren't just military people. You have like McDonald's workers on military bases because there's a McDonald's on base. So it's a small city, and then you have all the people that our wives, kids. They're all in those military bases. So it's not like you just have this like centralized area full of people ready to just like kick butt the second things go wrong. And I wanted to address all that, and I tried to do that. Now the downside is like book one takes place across like 48 hours. And the next couple books, like there's going to be gaps of time in between. So book one and book two feed right into each other. And then two has a couple months between 2 and 3 before the events continue.
Okay.
So told you a whole lot about Alone Together, but nothing was spoiled.
Yeah, you did a great job. I was like dancing around because I was like, I can't remember what you've said like to the wider public, and I thought I'll let you do that bit because I don't want to be the one that spoils somebody's book. Before I ask you my final question, I do want to ask, because you were talking about obviously time jumps and each book has got a different sort of structure. I didn't ask you this before. How do you keep track of everything? Are you quite organised? Because I'm not, as you can probably tell by the way I conduct my interviews.
I think you're perfectly organized. Give yourself a little bit of credit.
Thanks.
So I consider myself somewhat organized. I have a couple ways to jot down ideas. I'm very much an analog, archaic person. I have 3 different notebooks for 3 different purposes.
Okay.
I have a pocket notebook when I travel, so that if I think of a conversation, a phrase, a scene, I can make a quick note in there and I can come back and use that. I have another notebook that's a lined notebook that is specifically for sayings that I enjoy or a way a conversation flows. I'll take this as a moment. I had somebody leave me a negative review on a Fold to Extinction, and I say negative, it was a 3-star review, and said that I swore too much. And I thought that was very funny because the characters that swear a lot in my first novel, most of those conversations I had with somebody to some extent as a real conversation, slightly different, changed, things of that nature. But that's just how we spoke. When you have a bunch of dudes in the military and you're out and things are bad, you swear, and it is what it is. So I always thought that was kind of funny, but I try to mimic the way conversations really flow, so that when you read it, it's an organic, like, this is how somebody responds to X, Y, and Z. And then my other notebook is a blank notebook. It's like a sketchbook, and that's where I sketch out ideas. That's how I make my art covers for my books. Like, I'll put exactly what I want, and then I'll have a professional artist actually do it for me. And that's where we got like Sinner's Past cover, exactly what happened there. I drew it out. I had 2 different artists do the 2 different types of covers, and that's how we got the artwork for that. And same thing with Alone Together. I sketched it out, and then I had a professional artist actually go through and do it. And then when it comes down to timelines, characters, and events, I tried a couple different writing softwares out there. I have it on my blog if you ever want to read like the tools that I use for my trade. But what I found was, like, I used Scrivener because I really enjoyed at the time period. They had a cork board where you can move things around like note cards.
Okay.
But I didn't feel like doing it on a computer was beneficial, and it was driving me nuts. So I got rid of Scrivener, and I just ended up using PowerPoint. And I had the same ability in PowerPoint without all the functionality that was driving me nuts. So, like, I can have a card in PowerPoint, a slide, that's what they call it. And it's a character. I have everything I need on that character. And then in the notes section, I can have lines that they say what happens in certain chapters to them. And then when they die, I can take that character and I can put it in a section that's labeled dead characters, so that if I ever have to reference a character later in a series, like, they're down there. And I do the same thing with events. I have maps for like Alone Together, since it's set in the United States. I have a general map of the United States. I have where major roads are in a different area. I have pipelines and railroads lined out across the United States. Somebody's going to raid my house. They're going to think that I'm planning a terrorist attack. And it's not.
It's books.
Yeah.
It's books.
They're going to be like, why did you have all the pipelines in the city mapped out? I'm like, I know what it looks like.
Here's my manuscript. Please don't shoot me.
But it's like my wife came in one time, and I think she thought she was going to catch me doing something else, and she looked at my screen, and it was a picture of a bear attack victim, and she was like, "Why the fuck are you looking at that?" I was like, I can explain.
It's research, honey. That is. Do you know what? That's the funniest thing, because I sometimes skirt around what I want to Google because I'm scared to Google it. I'm scared to like search for the thing that I'm trying to research
Just
because it
message me
just
all
looks sus. It just looks sus. I was going to ask you what's next. You've given yourself a very big project with the series that you're working on at the moment. Are you working on anything else? I don't expect you to be because you're already doing plenty, but have you got any plans to do anything else?
Yeah, I'm actually working on a couple things. So just like my reading, like I read multiple books at once, and it's just more of a necessity than anything else, but it's bled over into doing my projects. So I have Alone Together. I have all the books that go along with that in the work. But I also have a standalone vampire novel I've been coming to and leaving, going back to several times, trying to figure out how to make it my own without somebody being like, this is just a knockoff of every other vampire story. So trying to do that. I have my grimdark fantasy series. I have like half the first book written, and I keep going back and changing things. And I've learned a lot since I started it, and I need to go back and reapply those to it.
Okay.
Obviously, I'm still writing short stories. So the next few short stories that I come out with that are all, of course, going to be free, they will all be tied to Alone Together to some extent. And then I have some, I don't want to call them short stories again, but it's not quite art. They're fictitious articles that are tied to Alone Together that will also be pushed out there. And then I have my podcast that, aside from just doing general talking about literature and authors, I'll have guest interviews similar to what you're doing here. But my big push on that is I try and get them to read short stories or sections of their stories themselves so that you can hear directly from them. And then I'm going to read some of my own short stories as well. I put sound effects and everything into them. So one of my short stories for Sinner's Pass, which is Hero's Downfall, it was too long to be read on the Lunatics Project, which they're a great company out there, or I don't want to call them a company. They're a great group that does horror-oriented podcasts. So I decided I was going to go through it, and I read it myself, and that'll be one of my upcoming podcasts as well. So I highly recommend, join my newsletter, watch out for free books, which will come out every time a new novel comes out. I'll do some type of giveaway. Watch out for opportunities to be a bettor or an ARC reader with me. And then you'll also get all the updates on my podcast. I share them on my newsletter.
Great. Thank you so much. And before you go, where can people find you and your work?
Yeah, you can find me at ssfitzgerald.net. That's my website. If you click the logo at the top, you can see all my socials, and then I'll share with you all my social links as well. I'm on Linktree. If you want to buy directly from me, I have my Buy Me a Coffee site, which you can buy signed copies if you didn't get to catch me at one of the local events. And if you really want to see your name show up in a novel or a short story, you can also go to the commissions there, and for $1, you can put your name in one of my stories. Can't promise I won't kill you, but your name will be.
Amazing. Thank you so much. Well, it's been a pleasure having you on today, and I really appreciate you being here, and thank you for talking with me.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me. It's been great.